Good afternoon. Good afternoon. This is Walter L. Smith II, the host of the Sunday Forum, here right now on the Walt Busy channel, and we welcome you to the Forum of the Fourth Estate. This is the spin-off show of the Sunday Forum radio show that you can listen to every Sunday from 8 to 10 a.m. On WMNF 88.5 FM, the NPR station here in Tampa, Florida. And this past weekend, we had a discussion with this young man, Dr. Fasil Gabriel, and we were able to get him here for a post-show discussion. And as always, I have my main man. What's going on?
Good to be back.
You all right? All right, all right. So Eric Gales is here with us again for this week, and we are going to discuss Ethiopia. This being Black History Month, it's very critical that we talk about the diaspora and to have some discussions regarding one of the, if not the most famous of countries on the continent of Africa, certainly the hotspot and critical point on the continent of Africa for many, many reasons and for many, many centuries. Ethiopia has been basically the part of the breadbasket, if you will, of the world. And so even today, we'll find as we talk with Dr. Gabriel on the show, we had a tremendous show, very, very insightful, very, very informative about Ethiopia, where it stands right now, dealing with the issue of repatriation. Doc, glad to have you here. Very glad to have you here.
Thank you.
So let's start. So this weekend we spoke about several issues. And I think perhaps one of the most contentious points was probably having to deal with the geopolitics of Ethiopia. And we never really got to get into it per se. We kind of touched on it when we spoke about the issue of the dam. And if you want to check out more of that information, you can go to the Walter L. Smith II Facebook page or the Sunday Forum Facebook page. Doc, let's talk about the situation with the dam. Ethiopia, geopolitically, is surrounded by several countries, right? But in the ancient world, those countries were a part of Ethiopia, correct?
Yes.
And what countries are those? Sudan, Somalia?
Part of the Sudan, part of Somalia, part of Yemen. Those are what you call part of old Ethiopia.
Right.
Ethiopia today is really sits right on the Horn of Africa, bordering on Eritrea, Somalia, Kenya, and the Sudan. Those are the bordering states, and it's a major country. It is the largest, one of the largest population concentrations in Africa. Next to Nigeria, Ethiopia has the largest population, close to about 110 million. Nigeria is the largest, about 160 million, and Egypt is the third, maybe around 97 million, 96 million people. It's a country that has always been independent, has never been colonized, except for the 4-year occupation of the Italians, which they really never colonized per se, because the resistance fighters were constantly, just like France and the rest of Europe that was occupied by Nazi Germany. Fascist Italy had occupied Ethiopia for a short period of time. So its history goes back a long ways. You go back to prehistoric, as they call it. It's not necessarily prehistoric, but thousands of years. When Roma was in power in Ethiopia, the Aksumite kingdom was a major power, trading with India, Saudi Arabia, and the rest of the world. well known by both the Greeks and the Romans. Greek historians characterize Ethiopia as Habesha, but that term actually came from the Arabs. The Arab scholars called Habesh, so Abyssinia, that's the word it came from. That's another name for Ethiopia. But it sits on 8,000 feet above sea level, most part of the country. We characterize our 13 months of sunshine, cool and temperate climate, very significant mountains and valleys, and tremendous number of freshwater rivers. And Ethiopia is one of the richest countries in terms of fresh water. And the dam is part of the solution to generate energy, to build its industries.
It's clean energy.
It's clean energy. It's also dependable energy. By the way, the Renaissance Dam has already started generating power.
The Renaissance Dam is the dam that's in
Yes, in
Ethiopia.
It's in Ethiopia, which is the contention between Egypt and Ethiopia has to do with the dam. And Egypt has always claimed that it's the master of the Nile, even though 100% of the water that flows both in the White Nile and the Blue Nile flow from Ethiopia. It's interesting. They claim it flows from Lake Victoria. Lake Victoria gets its water from a river that flows from Ethiopia. So it's a roundabout way. All the river of the Nile flows from Ethiopia.
Wow.
Originates in Ethiopia.
Wow.
The dam became a contentious thing with Egypt because Egypt basically considers itself as the master. To determine whatever, and that was an idea that originates from the British colonialism of Egypt and the Sudan when they used to rule that area as one. Both Sudan and Egypt was ruled by the British, and they have signed a treaty between themselves, between Egypt, Sudan, and the British.
Right.
Which basically says Egypt is the master of the Nile in a summary form.
Wow.
And that Ethiopia doesn't have any right. And Ethiopia has never used the water of the Nile for centuries.
Didn't have to.
Well, it couldn't. It couldn't because great powers were not interested in really developing. Especially the colonial powers, they're interested in controlling and extracting whatever resources. But the Ethiopian people basically raised the money on their own to build the Renaissance Dam, which is now the largest dam in Africa. 6,000 megawatt power source.
It supports other countries, correct? It does support other countries.
Oh yeah. Well, Ethiopia has been, going back to the Battle of Adwa, which is Menelik II emperor. That victory had resonated all over the world because it was the first African country that defeated the Western power.
And now let's talk about that for a moment, because I think that's a real point of clearly a point of contention, right? When we talk about the reign of Menelik II, and we talk about the wars that took place, the battles for land and control those areas. Tell us about those battles and the importance to where we are right now.
Well, you have to go back. 1896 was when the battle took place between the Italians and the Ethiopians. And the Ethiopians defeated the Italians. But the Italians did not withdraw completely.
Right.
They still occupied what is today called Eritrea. That was part of Ethiopian territory. It was part of Ethiopia. Uh, and Menelik at that time was going through a very difficult time. The country was going through a very difficult time. There was a major disease that wiped out most of the cattle population. There was a lot of famine. So he didn't have the, the, the wherewithal or the capacity to drive the Italians completely out.
Right.
So he signed an agreement with them which basically said that that territory belongs to Ethiopia, but we're here now, kind of thing. The battle resonated all over the world. If you go back and read Western newspapers, even in America, if you read newspapers, you'll find that it was publicized, especially in the black world. And it became a symbol of freedom, a symbol for fight.
The defeat of the Western
Yes,
of a Western
the
power.
defeat of a colonialist power by an African, and it became a big deal. There were demonstrations in different parts of the world, but it was really the beginning of what the rest of the African, the rest of black people started looking up to Ethiopia as the model for liberation and freedom. And that carried all the way through the Second World War. The 1930s, in the late 1930s, when Ethiopia was being attacked by Italy.
Again.
In Harlem, there were over 9,000 African Americans who were ready to go and fight, and they were doing demonstrations. And you should go back and dig newspapers
Right.
in the 1930s.
That's actually
In the U.S., and you'll find so many stories about the relationship between the African Americans and the Ethiopians. There were people, one of them was Robinson, an African American, a pilot who basically joined the Ethiopian Air Force and fought side by side with the Ethiopians. And the 8,000 or so people who want to go back and fight, the U.S. government basically discouraged that because they wanted to stay neutral.
But they allow Italians.
Yes.
The strange thing about that is they did not allow Black Americans to go to Africa and fight in defense of, as they say in John Henry Clark's A Great and Mighty Walk, which was narrated by Wesley Snipes, by the way. That they have actual film, they have footage of people signing up in Harlem, saying that why do you want to fight in this war? We want to fight in defense of Abyssinia.
Yes.
That's what they said.
And how were they going to make their way from America?
Well, of course they needed the support of the U.S. government, but the U.S. government at that time was under a lot of pressure from the Italian community in New York, which had a stronger voice. They didn't have the population, but they definitely had the stronger voice.
Right.
They were trying to convince America to stay neutral. So Roosevelt at the time didn't have the support of the American people to support Ethiopia.
Right.
And so he basically discouraged that from taking place.
And you said that this was taking place during the 1930s?
Yes, 1935-36 time period.
Was
Rule of
this
Law
around the
Times.
same period of Marcus Garvey and his movement?
Yeah.
Or you
That's
were-
what it sound- Yeah.
Right.
The Harlem Renaissance period, yes.
And
That's when it started. That's when it happened. I'm basically do not know exact dates of
Right.
Marcus Garvey.
It's definitely about the time Marcus Garvey. Matter of fact, it's at its height. at this particular point.
Because I'm thinking Marcus Garvey had a shipping line,
That's right, the Black Star Line.
and possibly he would use his shipping line in order to transport.
Yeah, but the U.S.
African American.
government does not allow that, so that's the end of it. I mean, they weren't allowed. They
And that
couldn't
was
go.
that.
They couldn't fight.
Right.
But going back, maybe about 100 years or so, before 1896, in the late 1700s, when Egypt started claiming, now you see, Egypt is always there, claiming that territory and the port, the Red Sea. They waged war with Ethiopia, and they actually hired, what's his name, a Swiss general named Musinger or something, Musinger, I think, to fight on the side of the Egyptians. And they also had four mercenary soldiers from the Confederacy. Two of them were Confederate generals
Wow.
who fought on the side of the Egyptians. They were killed. That was a defeat of the Egyptians, and they were given out. And then it goes on and on. I mean, trying to control Ethiopia has not been just one war; it's been several wars. It's the fact that this black African country that has stayed independent, that has its own religion, it has its own history, it has its own alphabet, and it has, whenever you attack, they galvanize together. No matter how divided they are,
Right.
when it becomes a threat to Ethiopia, they come together. Even today, that's happening. It just sits on the.
It's a bad
They
taste in the
couldn't-
mouth of the
They
Western world.
couldn't swallow it. They can't spit it out. That's basically what it is. Until this day. I mean, you have to go and read. I'll send you information about a British lord who traveled all over Africa. Went back in the 1830s to the British Parliament and gave a report. His report basically said, I traveled all over Africa.
Was it Macaulay, I think it was?
Yes, Macaulay.
Uh-huh.
Lord Macaulay. Yes, he said, I traveled all over Africa. He said, there is no crime. The people are very peaceful. They are very friendly, very civilized and cultured. If we want to control, if we want to go in their control, we have to find a strategy, which is basically we have to start the religious movement.
As far as destabilization
Yes,
movement.
separate them along ethnic lines, religious lines, and basically show them that we are better for them, and that's the way we're going to have to control it.
So
And then so that drove to the late 1800s when the Treaty of Berlin, where they sat down and divided the continent among the European powers.
Right.
And Italy, of course, claimed Ethiopia and Libya, which they've never been able to. The Roman Empire is over.
they never got over that part.
They never got over that. So that relationship today, when you even look at the continent of Africa, there is a much stronger tendency of movement for working together and trading with each other instead of just depending on the West and saying we have to start feeding ourselves. We don't want to rely on World Food Organization. Those are dependency. That's the control mechanisms.
Right.
We have our own tools and our own methodologies. Let's collaborate and take care of ourselves.
Interesting point. As we talk about the Western world and how they just cannot stomach the control, the self-governing, and the self-control, and the continuation, if you will, of the original culture, the people still operating in an African nation, like in Ethiopia's case. We're talking about a country that has not been conquered, has not been conquered, refuses to stand down, and continues to this day to not succumb to the colonial masters, the colonial powers, even in neo-colonial standards. By my neo-colonial standards, Ethiopia has stood up second to none in my mind. Even though we look up to Ghana, right, and as the Black Star Nation, as the nation where with the first modern independence movement, right. But we look at Ethiopia's continued defeat of those colonial powers. It's not just a matter of just them coming in, and they didn't just walk in there and take over. The West didn't just do that. That never happened, and that is something that I find to be incredible.
You see, the current over the last, after the Soviet Union collapsed, if you remember, there was a large discussion about the peace dividend. Remember that? The peace dividend was, we've been spending a lot of money on military power and all that type of thing. Now, we don't really need to do that, so why don't we save the money and start spending it, investing it in people in America, domestically? Why don't we improve our educational system? Why don't we do economic development, and so on and so forth? That was the peace. So it was there for just a short while, and then that news was just absolutely killed, totally, okay. And basically, when you really look at it, then the shift was, okay, what's our next agenda? Oh, we have to advance democracy. We have to advance human rights. We have values, and we want you to take our values. And the rest of the world is saying, we have values too.
We have values.
We have our own values.
Our own culture.
We may have our own culture. We have our own identity. We don't have to. But if you really look all the countries that have been destabilized, from Libya, Iraq, to Afghanistan, to Yemen, you go all over the world. What do we have? Chaos. How did it start? You have to take our values. You don't have human rights. So we have to come and teach you about human rights. Okay? And that becomes a methodology through which to split people. And become the kingmakers.
What's the name of the gentleman that was supposed to have come to the United States and done the papers, the discussion along the St. Johns River, and everybody's debating as to whether or not it actually happened or not, but the concept still stands. And so when we talk about that, we talk about McCulloch, and we talk about what you're saying. There are people out there who say that statement was never true. That statement was never truly made, right? And or never made to Parliament. Now, there's some dispute as to whether that happened, but
what do you do when something like this comes out? You only have the only option is to deny it happened.
Right.
But it did happen. I mean, if you really look at what the activities that took place after that, it's obvious what was happening is what he recommended. Whether he made it in Parliament or anywhere else, it's out there. Well, we can go to the modern times. Under Nixon's presidency, Henry Kissinger was his national security advisor.
Exactly.
And
He
it
used
was
it.
a written memo
Yes.
from Henry Kissinger, which basically says the only way we can control Ethiopia is by dividing it along ethnic lines, along religious lines, and so on and so forth. And that's been happening.
Right.
Let me ask you a question. When you talk about Ethiopia,
Yes.
and you're talking about the strength of the people, I mean, and the resilience of the people, what specifically is it that separates them from the other surrounding countries that have allowed themselves
Very good question.
to be conquered?
Very good question. I think one of the things is basically the long history, thousands of years of history of government. Institutionalized government existed in Ethiopia long before London was London or Paris was Paris. That institutional structure, and then you combine that with the religions, two powerful religions, Christianity and the Muslim religion. Ethiopians, basically, the Muslim religions do not say, I'm a Saudi Arabian. If you go to Ethiopian Muslim, he says he's an Ethiopian. That's that sense of identity. And being able to work together and live together, sharing different food, the culture, the clothing,
Right.
and so on and so forth. So there is a national identity. A national identity and your culture are the core strength of a nation. And Ethiopia has not abandoned. To a certain extent, it's been diminished and it's been weakened by Ethiopians themselves. So-called educated Ethiopians who go from the West, from Europe and so on, trying to
Assimilating somewhere.
they can, come with ideas and ideologies and religions that they have acquired and so they come in and those are the weak links. Other than that, that's one. So the national identity, the fact that it has history of governments, the religion, all combine to make Ethiopia a very, very powerful country. And Ethiopia has always been successful militarily. Even though people look at barefoot Ethiopians running around with swords and spears. They did a number on the Italians.
Yeah, they did. Yes, they did. Yes, they did. And especially given that Ethiopia was not an industrialized nation in those times, which many scholars, historians and scholars have determined that to have been as amazing, which I think is amazing, given that it's been invaded so many times by Italy, right? And by European powers.
By Ottoman Turks,
Yeah.
by Italy,
Yes.
by Egypt.
Amazing. And they still whoop these guys, amazing.
Would you say because of that strong cultural understanding that they have, and that not so much religious, but spiritual understanding is what is the guiding principle for them?
The spiritual element is a very, very important element.
And very powerful.
It's very, very important element. And, a sense of moral values flows from that. A sense of right and wrong flows from that. A sense of responsibility as a citizen flows from that. Those are core
belief.
Yes.
In the belief in the divinity itself and the understanding of the divinity and the power within.
Yes. It's interesting, some time ago there was a lot of denigration of Muslims. September 11th came around and we decided that they are enemy. And instead of really focusing on the perpetrators, we sort of start condemning the entire religion. In the Muslim religion, for instance, they believe that the mother of Christ, Mary, had her son as a virgin. They believe that. Okay. How many Western religious believe in that?
Right.
How do they espouse that? How much of the miracle do they believe in, or do they believe in just the material world? It separates you from the material world and the spiritual world. That spiritual world is a core part of Ethiopia's civilization. And the spiritual world crosses over from Christians and Muslims, the two major religions in Ethiopia. And also the Jews that are left there, that have not been, shipped out.
Let's talk about it.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that, because that is a major characteristic, if you will, of Ethiopian history and for Ethiopia as a whole and its identity. And especially given post prehistoric and then reasonable ancient times. When we talk about time periods, we're talking about something prior to the Roman Empire, right? And so when we talk about that, we think of King Solomon, we think of the Queen of Sheba, and we think of their offspring, Menelik, right, the first. And so and we spoke about that on the show. So I think I want to take it a step further. And for those people who are out there watching, what I'm referring to is the story of the Queen of Sheba and how that it's in the Bible, it's in the Quran, it talks about the meeting of Sheba and Solomon and their offspring Menelik and her travels back to Ethiopia. And of course, Ethiopia is supposed to be the place where the Ark of the Covenant is. We saw it even in Western movies like Raiders of the Lost Ark, right? So even white people believe. We see the documentaries. White people believe that the Ark of the Covenant is in Ethiopia. So tell us about the importance of that story, or the importance of that fact.
Well, it's interesting when you look at Ethiopians, immigrants in the United States. What's the first thing they do after they get themselves a job? Is look for a place to worship. And what do they install? They don't install Protestant religion. There are Protestant churches, but there are many Protestant churches in the United States. So there are Ethiopian Protestants who go to Protestant churches. But most Ethiopians establish Ethiopian Orthodox religion, and the first thing they do is a replica of the Ark has to be part of that church in order for that church to be considered an acceptable Ethiopian Orthodox church.
Did not know that.
Yes, and the replica is made. And when you go, for instance, if you would like to do it at some point, we'd like to invite you to the Ethiopian church on a special celebration when the Ark, the replica of the Ark, comes out of the church only on special occasions, like crucifixion of Christ, Saint Mary's passing away, or special religious holidays. The Ark goes out and people celebrate.
You have a celebration for Mary's passing?
Oh, yeah.
Really? Wow. We don't know anything about that.
And her birth date,
really?
her passing away, she didn't die.
Wow.
And that is our belief.
You're talking about Mary, the mother of Jesus.
Yes.
Wow.
Our Holy Mother.
Wow.
Holy
That is
Mother.
very interesting.
Mary, for instance, our church, the one that I go to, It's called St. Mary's. Ethiopian.
And your name. I remember you telling me your name means helper of Mary. Is that it? Helper of Mary?
Servant.
Servant of Mary. That's right. That's
Gabra Mariam. Mariam is Mary. Gabra is a servant. Madhani Alim. There is another one called, that's the Savior. In Amharic, it's Madhani Alim. There is a Madhani Alim church, another church. Here in Tab, there are two major churches, Ethiopian Orthodox churches. And each of them have to have
the ark.
The replica. It's not the original. The original ark
Well,
resides in Church of Saint Mary in Aksum. Okay, that's where it resides, and the Aksumite kingdom. The Aksumite kingdom is a major civilization, Ethiopian civilization, and Sabian is even before that. So you Saba, Queen of Sheba, Saba. We also called her Makeda.
Yes.
Those are different names.
Yes. You know, the Western
She's
world.
the one that she wanted to go and visit this wise king, Solomon. And she took gifts and her army and contingents in to visit Solomon. And that's the Chronicles, the Ethiopian Chronicles, basically gives you a history of what happened.
And how the two of them came together.
Two cultures came together.
Yes.
It's
And
funny.
how the ark came back to Ethiopia.
It's funny how that story sounds very strangely like the story of Cleopatra and how she met Julius Caesar. Just saying. I'm just saying.
Yes.
Just saying.
Yes.
But still, you know, and her divinity, you
Right.
know. But nevertheless, I digress. We won't start that discussion necessarily. But I think that is a tremendous story. That continues to be the story that keeps Ethiopia on the map, because so many people have come from the Western world to visit to see the place where the ark is, because they can't get in to see the ark, because if you look at the ark, what'll happen? You die. So there's only one person, maybe three. I think it's three people,
One priest.
or one priest
He's
to say.
selected to clean whatever it is, and he's the only one who's allowed to do that. And before he passes, he usually selects him. It's interesting, those priests live a long life, a very long life. And they select who's going to replace them.
Wow.
Regarding the ark.
And that's the only individual that's able to go
That's
into.
the only individual that's
Able to even look at it.
this.
Yeah, because I kind of remember seeing something like that. I don't know if it was a 60-minute special when they showed the building itself, and it appeared to be a building with a church with no windows. It kind of sat off to itself, if I remember correctly. If it was the same building.
I don't remember the Windows part.
Right.
Yes, you're talking about church.
The church
Church
itself.
of Saint Mary.
That it has no
That
meaning.
is, by the way, that is the modern church that was built by Emperor Haile Selassie. The old church was collapsing, so built a new one, and that's the one you see.
That's the one.
So
But there are some very, when you go to La Libera, I don't know if you know anything about La Libera.
I do.
If you look at the rock-hewn churches of La Libera, they are much more of a miracle than the pyramids, because it is a church that's built below the ground out of chiseled rock, single rocks. Yes, those are several of them. There are about 7 or 8 of them out there in La Libera.
They built right, exactly.
They built it. It's a sign of cross on top. It is
they're in the process of trying to preserve them
Yes,
now.
yes.
They created a canopy
Canopy
over top of them. Right, exactly. Yes,
Preserve
that's
some of the
right.
erosion.
Try to preserve.
But they have survived for thousands of years. I mean,
Right.
It's time. It's time for that. I love the respect for that, right? The fact that they would do that and
When you
continue
look
to
at-
preserve that whole
Well,
thing.
Europeans have taken a huge interest in that church now, in the preservation of that. In addition
the
to
French, especially,
yes,
are very much interested.
And that's one of the main languages that's spoken, or secondary languages spoken in Ethiopia is French.
English is a second.
Is English second, and then French?
French,
Which one?
yes, yes.
Okay.
English is much widely spoken. But Amharic, the Ethiopian language,
Amharic is the
really
main
the
one.
one that's mostly spoken.
The-
So they have preserved our own language. So
Thank
we
God.
don't operate in English overseas. We can operate in English overseas, but when we're at home, we operate in Amharic,
Right,
the
right.
Ethiopian language.
And that was the downfall. Right, but that was the downfall of South Africa, for instance, for Black South Africans, in terms of the colonization efforts through the Bantu Education Act, was to stop and keep Black South Africans from learning English as a standard as a medium of education. So they could not operate on a global economic level.
right.
Ethiopia, however, they can speak English, and it was a medium of learning. People were able to do it and function on that level. I mean, you're talking about a country, of course, a nation that's able to function on a global economic level for centuries, for millennia now. But now let's talk about let's shift gears a little bit here, and let's talk about the relationship between Ethiopian Jews and the Israeli government, and how that has been
Well,
contentious. Let's be very honest about it, though.
well, it's actually the American Jewish movement that basically started the movement of repatriating the Ethiopian Jews to Israel. They funded the program, they pushed and lobbied for it. The Israeli government was not supportive of that originally because the American Jewish community and the European Jewish community that pushed for it.
Why?
Repatriate them because at that time the Ethiopian government was an ally of the Soviet Union and was not popular in the West, and they claimed that the Jews are being mistreated in Ethiopia.
Which was
that
not
type
true.
of Propaganda. Well, everybody suffered. I mean, it's not just
It wasn't just that wasn't a matter of the religion, right?
Yes, it
right,
doesn't really
right.
matter. The Muslims suffered, the Christians suffered. I mean, it was a difficult time. It was
Who was the leader?
literally civil. Colonel Mengistu Haile Mariam.
Okay.
Mengistu Haile Mariam was the president of Ethiopia at the time. So they negotiated and they basically started airlifting them into Israel.
And this was the Operation Solomon
Yes.
that we were speaking about earlier.
Yes.
And the other two operations, Operation Moses
I'm not
and
familiar.
Operation Joshua.
I have heard about both of them. They're probably the same continuation
same
of the
type
same
of process.
Yes.
I got you.
No, so the attitude. What was the attitude of the Israeli government towards these Ethiopian Jews?
Well, Ethiopians, being black, face the same kind of discrimination in Israel. There are Jews who accepted them, tried to treat them well, and there are also others who basically did not. But the Ethiopian Jews in Israel have gained a lot of power not a lot, but they do have members of parliament in Israel. They do hold positions in the Israeli military. But they have also maintained a contact with Ethiopia. You know, they say you can never put Ethiopia out of your system. Once you're in there, you'll always be an Ethiopian. Yeah, but now we're talking about dual citizenship. We're pushing for dual citizenship.
There you go. There you go.
And but it's interesting. Over the Ethiopia's history, we have been very accepting of refugees from different parts of the world. One of the largest Syrian refugees today is in Ethiopia.
Syrian refugee.
Yes.
And why is that? So just for the purpose of the viewers that out there,
Well-
what was the reason for that?
For one of the reasons, historically it's known for accepting refugees and treating them well.
Right.
You know, when you go back in the 6th century after Christ, when Muhammad and his followers were being persecuted in Mecca and Medina, the Prophet Muhammad basically told his followers to go to Ethiopia. They are accepting and tolerant, and they'll treat you well. And he also said, don't never attack Ethiopia. Say that.
Okay.
And that's his family moved into Ethiopia. It's the Prophet's family that became Ethiopia
This is Prophet Muhammad.
saved the religion.
Uh-huh.
Basically. And it historically it's always known as tolerant, accepting, as long as you don't attack them. You know, you can practice your own religion, you can live as long as you respect the laws of the land, and that is basically it. And so it's known for tolerance. For some of them, for the Christian Syrians, it's, you know, where do you go?
Right.
The West doesn't want you. Okay. We create the havoc, and then we don't want any of your refugees.
Right.
We create the havoc in Libya, and we don't want any of your refugees. We create the havoc in Iraq and different places. But Ethiopia has, in fact, the Prime Minister sat and had a big dinner with them. It shows you on television. So
Wow.
we.
He'd be the Prime Minister of Ethiopia.
Yes. We went and visited the refugees, checked on the status, and they all talk about, you know, we're very happy. We don't want to go back.
And now, you know, Ethiopia has made a lot of strides. One of the things that is very critical, and I think everybody took notice of it, especially the ladies, is the fact that Ethiopia has a female president, chosen and voted in by Parliament as president of the nation. And by the way, you know, that was done during a period where we saw the first president of Malawi, the first lady president of Malawi. Now nobody saw that one coming. No one saw that one coming. If you know anything about the Malawian nation, you really would not see that coming. You look in Liberia, we had a female president. You know, so there was a series of female presidents that were popping up around the world, nations, even India, right? Even India. So now we're looking at a situation now where ladies are starting to take control of the globe, right? How has it been?
Most of the cabinet members, it's not just the president, a number of the cabinet offices in Ethiopia are held by women. And they're doing an excellent job. I think I always think that the world is better off in the hands of the
Women.
women, and the men should get out of the way. At least they have the nurturing side, the taking care side, well masters. We are different.
They're less likely to go and press a button and fire off a rocket somewhere. This is excellent. This is excellent. You know, and I think it would be wrong of us to have this discussion and not talk about the Emperor Haile Selassie. On our show, you pointed out the fact that your father worked with him, and I'll never forget the story that you told about your encounter with him as a student and how nervous you were.
He has such a very powerful presence.
And he was a short man.
Yes, he was a short man, but very dignified. Doesn't eat much. Was healthy all of his life. Very religious. Very, very religious. And Haile Selassie is a unique person. He took over from Emperor Menelik, who was the first modern. Actually, you go to Emperor Theodros, who unified Ethiopia, and then Emperor Menelik started the modernization, and Haile Selassie basically took that mantle and moved it a lot further. He's well known for his speech at the League of Nations. Now, Ethiopia is a founding member of the League of Nations.
Yes.
And also a founding member of the United Nations. And there are really too many other African countries who are a member of the League of Nations. Ethiopia is the only one. I think the UN, when it was established, I think Liberia was also one of the founding members. You know, Liberia is basically established through African Americans who
Immigrating with an
back.
E, as we say.
Yes, exactly. And the flag is similar to the U.S. flag, except that it has the one star instead of the 50 stars. But Ethiopia has been part of the international. Haile Selassie at the League of Nations when Ethiopia was being attacked by Italy, and nerve gases were used to defeat. Actually, the Ethiopian army was beating them when they decided we can't handle this, and they started using
Nerve gas, which they got it from Germany, correct?
Huh?
The nerve gas they developed from Germany, I think. I know that during World War I, Germany was using nerve gas, and that was a real issue with the League of Nations. Like,
Yes,
what are you doing?
Yeah. But they used nerve gas to disperse the military, but they wouldn't have won if it wasn't for the nerve gas. But when he spoke at the League of Nations, he said, today it's us, tomorrow it's you. And that's exactly what happened. France was invaded, Belgium was gone. I mean, Europe was under Hitler's control. Fascist Italy, and you know the story.
Right, yeah. Incredible story.
Haile Selassie started the modernization under difficult circumstances because it is a rich country in resources, but it's a poor country in terms of getting foreign
Support.
support in the right way. I mean, if you sold your soul, you'll always get support. But
Right.
Haile Selassie was not willing to sell the soul of the country, the natural resources, in order to get some support.
Right.
But nevertheless, under the Roosevelt presidency, it got a lot of support. Under the Kennedy administration, it got a lot of support. But Kennedy was a profound leader who was really determined to change the course of American history for the better. And he was skillful, and he changed the direction. He went into Vietnam, the CIA started meddling in so many different countries.
Right.
We started basically the decline from then on,
Right.
and we've never stopped.
Right.
Haile Selassie has had the respect of so many other countries, but he wrote the first constitution for Ethiopia. I mean, the modern constitution. In fact, I remember when I was young, there was members of parliament that were elected. And there was one incident, for instance, during his reign, where parliament wanted, well, the government wanted to build a dam. And they were getting a small dam, and they were going to get a loan. And Haile Selassie said, well, there's a parliament, you go and ask the permission of parliament, why do you come to me? So the ministers went to parliament and they said, we're going to borrow so much money. You're going to borrow so much money? What have you done with all the money that you have borrowed before? No, we're not going to allow it. So the parliament revolted. So the ministers went back to Haile Selassie and said, they refused to approve. So, well, change your approach. Go and convince them. I mean, you have to find the method. Why do you ask me to approve it? I don't want to intervene. He was sort of helping them modernize their thinking. So finally, they decided the only way we can convince them is by showing them the past loans that we have taken and what we have done with it. So they took them on a tour, showed them the schools, the hospitals, the things that the money went to. They said, oh, okay, if that's the case, then we'll approve it. That's how the parliament approved that budget. So to a large extent, he tried to push the country towards democracy, but I don't know if we were ready for it at the time, because there are the traditionalist people who wanted
Absolutism.
the absolutism to reign. There are the lords and it was you know how monarchies operate.
Yes.
So that became a bone of contention, and then the 60s came in, the student movement, socialism, communism became such a popular word to use, and so we swung all the way to that side. It created a nightmare. It was disgrace the way we killed him. He could have. He already has descended from the throne, but he still has that powerful image and large following that the military could not afford to have him live, I guess.
And so the military, so Haile Selassie was killed.
He was killed. He was killed.
So
And even in his death, they didn't trust to bury him respectfully. He was buried later on after the Derg was gone, exhumed and with a proper religious ceremony.
under whose administration did that take place, where he was exhumed and buried properly?
After the military government was imposed. So he has there are controversies, there are issues that could have been handled differently, but they have made a difference in terms of the general trend. I don't think so, because the fever around this leftist movement was quite strong.
Right.
It was global.
Right.
So he became a victim of that. He was getting old, and it could have made a transition. It didn't happen. But Ethiopians still memorialize him for some of the good things that he has done for the country.
Absolutely.
Education, especially.
Oh yeah, big on education.
He was the minister of education. He didn't trust anybody else to handle that correctly.
Well, that's
He used to
good.
go around visiting the schools. I was in a boarding school, the government boarding school. He would come in, he would look around, check us out, and he would go into the kitchen area, taste the food, and when we know he's coming, we knew that the food is going to change.
So that was a good day to eat.
Oh yeah,
That's good.
When he's coming, oh my God! But actually, the food was not bad. It wasn't bad. We were fed well. We were, boarding school. You are supposed to wake up at 6 o'clock in the morning, and you're supposed to make your bed perfectly, line up
Yes.
for inspection, and then go out to the gym field and do your gymnastics. There is an instructor who sits there and watches you, and then you go back and take a shower and then go to the dining room and eat. Even when you are showering, there is an older guy who checks us out to make sure we're washing properly. You don't do the curtain and say, "You didn't wash that." I'll tell you, and the education was very, very good. I mean, the discipline
It sounds
was
like
formidable.
Yeah.
We're glad to know that the emperor was the minister of education.
Was the
That's a
driving
good
force
thing.
behind
That's a good
it.
thing.
Yeah.
Hey, listen, Doc, we want to thank you so much, and I felt that it was a good thing to end off on that note, on such a positive note, in dealing with the emperor and his legacy for the nation and his wishes is what he fought so hard for. For
He has accomplished quite a bit.
nearly a century, and so this is tremendous. We have a tremendous guest here, Dr. Fasil Gabramariam. We thank you. We thank you
Thank you
for
very much for the opportunity. I appreciate it.
glad to have you. Glad to have you here. Such a wealth of information that we have here. As usual, intelligent conversation that we promise that we're going to bring to you each and every week when I spin our show on the Walk Busy and YouTube channel, spin off from the Sunday Forum, the Forum of the Fourth Estate. And as always, with my man Eric Gales, and now with Dr. Fasil Gabramariam, we wish you well. And as always, from my voice to the airways, to the hearts and the minds of all of you out there, we love you. And there's absolutely nothing you can do about it here on the Forum for the Fourth Estate. See you next week.